The late October wind whipped through El Paso, Texas, in 2025, stirring dust across a sun-scorched lot where a crowd jostled under a canopy of frayed tarps and a lone Border Patrol banner snapping in the gusts. The air buzzed with tension ranchers in weathered Stetsons, their faces carved by sun and worry. Migrant workers clutching water bottles, their murmurs low and wary. Locals with signs scrawled in marker, some faded from months of protest. They'd gathered on this cracked patch of earth to hear Stephen Miller, the steely former Trump ad vy soar, whose crisp suit and clipped voice turned the makeshift rally into a furnace of charged anticipation. The lot, usually a quiet stretch near the Rio Grande, pulsed tonight, the distant hum of traffic blending with the howl of the wind. Miller's words sliced through the clamor security, sovereignty, stopping the invasion, his hands chopping the air like a guillotine, his pale face taut with con vy tie-in. The crowd responded unevenly, some shouting with fierce allegiance, others shifting with quiet unease, their applause a jagged pulse against the desert dusk. Beyond the tarps, the river glinted faintly, but near the front, a small figure stood poised, her dark ponytail swaying, a flicker of fierce resolve glowing beneath her wide brown, Aisa ripple against the storm. 9-year-old Ellie perched on a milk crate she'd scavenged from a nearby bodega, her dusty sneakers planted firm, a battered green backpack slung over one shoulder. Her striped hoodie and white against the muted sprawl of khaki and denim shone like a signal in the fading light. Beside her, a wiry woman with a faded bandana and tired hands kept her gaze on Miller, her fingers twisting a rosary, her lips tight with a mix of pride and fear. Tucked in Ellie's backpack wasn't a snack or a toy, but a tattered journal, its pages a chaotic scribble of blue ink names, dates, questions she'd scratched out under the flicker of a kitchen bulb. "You don't have to say it, Mija," her tia had whispered as they'd left their cinderblock duplex that evening, the door creaking shut, her voice rough with strain. "He's cold, real cold." But Ellie's eyes had blazed, her grip tightening on her backpack until her knuckles paled. "I gotta know," she'd said, and her tia had seen a fire in her she couldn't quench, a fire sparked by a friend she couldn't find. 6 weeks back, Ellie's world had splintered. Her classmate Luis Den, with a lopsided grin and a knack for soccer, had vanished after his dad's deportation, his desk left empty in their third-grade room. She'd overheard her tia and the neighbors at the laundromat, their voices hushed over detergent jugs. Miller's policies tore him apart, said it'd keep us safe, one had muttered, but now kids like Luis are gone. Ellie had lain awake that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering why the man on TV bragged about walls when Luis's laughter had stopped. Her tia's story saw a family holding strong, of leaders who built bridges clashed with Luis's absence. The way her tia's hands shook when she spoke of La Migra. She'd started writing in that journal stick figure boys, border lines then words, short and fierce, until they shaped the one she carried now, a challenge she'd fling straight at Miller's feet. Miller powered through his speech with the prosecutor's edge border stats, crime rates, taking America back, his suit pristine as he smirked, pulling sharp cheers and scattered claps. He spoke of protecting our kids, of ending the chaos, his voice a relentless blade of certainty. Ellie watched, her stillness eerie amid the restless crowd, her fingers tracing her backpack's frayed zipper, her eyes tracking Miller's every move, the way his hand slashed, the way his smirk stayed locked, a wall she couldn't trust. The crowd stirred, some vy-ing signs with fervor, others slumping against tarps with a fatigue born of hard summers and empty promises. A rancher in the back adjusted his hat, grumbling about cattle theft. A worker beside him clutched his bottle, his sigh thick with dust. But Ellie stood like a hawk, her breath shallow, her pulse racing as she waited for a moment. The moderatora lean man with a headset and a nervous tick opened the floor, and the lot surged awake. Hands shot UPA trucker barking about gas taxes, his growl thick with diesel, a mom asking about schools, her tone sharp, a retiree fussing over benefits, his voice cracking as he stood. Miller fired back with cold, practice precision data on deportations, swipes at open border libs, a nod to Texas steel. The crowd clapped thinly, some whooping, others trading looks that whispered doubts unvoiced, his answers sharp but hollow, like ice without weight. Ellie's Tia glanced at her rosary slipping as she whispered, "You sure, Mija?" But Ellie shook her head, her ponytail bouncing, and slid off her crate with a thud that cut the drone. She pushed forward, her sneakers crunching dirt, her steps sure as she wove through the tangle of legs and signs to the mic. The crowd didn't notice at first, their focus still on Miller's latest jab something about cartel handouts, but then heads turned, eyes narrowing as this tiny figure emerged. Whispers flared, "Who's that kid? What's she got? She's awful little." Their voices a low buzz that swelled as she reached the front. She stood there, dwarfed by the mic, her green backpack a shield against the tide of stairs. The moderator hesitated, his headset crackling, his mouth twitching to redirect, but Ellie raised a small hand, seizing her turn with a quiet nerve that stilled the lot. The chatter died, a taut hush falling like dusk on the desert, every rustle and cough swallowed by the silence. Miller paused, his head cocking, his icy gaze softening with a flicker of curiosity as he leaned forward. "Well, hello there, young lady," he said, his tone smooth and patronizing, a smirk tugging his lips. "What's on your mind?" Ellie unzipped her backpack, pulled out her journal, flipped to a page marked with a cross, and took a deep breath. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice soft but a dagger. "You say you're keeping us safe, so why's my friend Luis gone?" The words hit like a gust through sagebrush, clear and cutting, splitting the calm with a truth too stark to dodge. Miller's smirk vanished, his eyes widening, his hands freezing mid-gesture as the crowd sucked in a sharp, ragged breath. His face, a fortress of control and steel, faltered chalk etching lines across his brow, unease flashing in his stare, a crack he couldn't hide in that instant. A 9-year-old had outsmarted him flat. The silence stretched, dry and heavy, a storm brewing in the El Paso lot as Ellie's question lingered, its innocence slashing through Miller's rhetoric. It wasn't just a kid's plea, it was a splinter of reality piercing his platform's core, a cry scratched in ink that demanded more than stats. The tarps flapped faintly, casting jagged shadows across the dirt, as if the lot itself braced under the weight of her words. Miller stood pinned, his fingers twitching at his sides, his polished shell buckling under a gaze he hadn't steeled himself for in any briefing or fox hit. His eyes flicked to the crowd hunting for an anchor, grasping for ground then locked back on Ellie, who stood steady, her journal clutched like a sword, its blue scrawl a quiet shout against the void she couldn't ignore. The lot's hum faded, every rustle of a sign, every clink of a bottle, every stifled breath drowned by a silence that pulsed with her challenge. This wasn't a heckler's taunt or a pundit's trumpet, it was a little girl's truth, its clarity a spotlight on a man who'd built his name on walls, and it burned sharper than he could bear. Ellie didn't waver. Her sneakers stayed rooted, her brown eyes unflinching, daring Miller to answer not with numbers, but with something real. Her tias sank lower beside the crate, her bandana slipping as she clutched her rosary, torn between pride and dread for the storm her niece had unleashed. Whispers sparked, "She's got him good." What's he gonna say? Kids got spine. Their voices a low buzz that flared and hushed as the moderator waved them down, his headset crackling like static in a squall. Miller cleared his throat, a harsh rasp breaking the stillness, and adjusted his tie a tick, a tether he clung to as the crowd waited. "Well, that's quite a question, isn't it?" he said at last, his tone quieter now, stripped of its courtroom snap, the control fraying into something shaky. The crowd leaned in, their bodies a ripple of tilted hats and wide eyes, sensing a fault line in the man who'd shaped policy with iron, a fracture that deepened with every second he fumbled to bridge. He took a breath, his chest rising under his suit, and met Ellie's steady gaze with eyes that flickered just for a beat with something wrought out. Maybe, or a truth he'd sidestepped. "I grew up in California," he began, his voice softening into something clipped, almost brittle, playing in cul-de-sacs, biking with friends, learning to fight for order. We had rules, safety enough to thrive. His words drifted, and for a moment, he wasn't the cold architect who'd rattled DC, just a man peering into a past that didn't square with the present he'd forged. The crowd held still, the rancher in the back pausing mid-sip, the worker's bottle stilled in his grip, every eye fixed on Miller as he hung in his own tail. Ellie tilted her head, her ponytail swaying softly, her silence a quiet push that nudged Miller deeper into the moment. "I've got a niece about your age," he went on, his voice steadying but edged with a quiver he couldn't mask. "She's my shadow, loves puzzles, asks questions. But last year..." He stalled, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. "She asked me why her best friend Mary stopped coming over. I didn't know her mom got swept up in a raid I'd pushed, papers I'd signed. I told her it was complicated, thought my logic held. But hearing you, Ellie..." His voice cracked, a sharp snap that echoed across the lot. And he looked away, blinking fast against the shine in his eyes, his icy mask slipping as he grappled to hold it together. The crowd exhaled, a jagged wave of shock and feeling that swept the dirt like wind over the dunes. A mom in the front pressed a fist to her mouth, her gasp muffled but raw. A rancher muttered hell under his breath, his hat dipping low. A worker in the back hugged his bottle, his eyes glistening as he nodded slow. Ellie's Tia looked up, her bandana catching the dusk, a tear tracing her cheek to drip on her rosary. Leah vying a dark bead. Miller's words weren't just a reply, they were a fracture, a tear in the steel of the man who'd built his name on order, and they landed with a weight that rocked the lot to its bones. Miller pressed on, his voice firming but hollowed, as if the confession had carved something out of him. "We're securing, stopping threats, protecting families, pushing back chaos. I've argued it plenty. I ain't backing down." The words fell flat, a lawyer's echo drowned by the vulnerability he'd let bleed. Ellie's brow creased, her hands squeezing her journal until the pages crumpled, her lips tightening into a line that said she wasn't here for excuses, she wanted answers. Something real when Luis's chair stayed empty. The crowd felt it too, their murmurs shifting from awe to unrest, a restless tide bubbling as they waited for more. The moderator edged in, his headset a flimsy guard, his tick twitching as he moved to cut the thread. But Miller raised a hand, a quick snap that froze him, his shoes scuffing the dirt as he stepped forward, shedding the podium's cover entirely. He knelt before Ellie, his suit brushing the dust, his sharp edges blurring into something soft, almost frail. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice a murmur now, faint over the wind but thick with intent. "Ellie," she said, firm, fierce, a quiet spark flaring beneath her breath. Miller nodded, a faint smile breaking through the cracks, his eyes shimmering with something unguarded. "You're a thinker." Ellie's smarter than me, smarter than most. Soft claps rippled through, fading as the air grew dense, taut with expectation. Ellie shifted her sneakers, crunching dirt, and looked up at Miller with a clarity that cut through the haze. "Tia says safe means keeping us together," she said, her voice a clear chime that sliced the hush like a bell over the river. "So why are you building walls if Luis ain't here?" Miller rocked back, his face full dinga flash of a man undone, not a strategist, his logic dissolved, vying into something lost and bare. The crowd caught its breath, a mom's sob breaking loose, a rancher's fist tightening as he nodded, the weight of Ellie's words pressing down on every heart in the lot. Miller rose slow, his movements heavy, his hands flexing as he faced the crowd, his gaze sweeping them with a burden that hadn't been there before, a mix of shame and fire flickering in his stare. "She's got me there," he said, his voice louder now, cracked but climbing, cutting through the murmurs like a blade through brush. "I've been pushing safety, walls, protecting us, but if kids like Ellie and Luis are losing out while I'm stacking rules, then I ain't got it right. I ain't done Maria right." The lot erupted gasps sharp as ice, sobs spilling from throats too tight to hold, a swell of disbelief that crashed over the tarps like a flood over the flats. A trucker leapt up, his hands clasped as dust fell from his boots. A retiree slammed his sign, his damn right a rasp that rolled through. A mom clutched her kid, her whispered about time, lost in the roar but carved in her wet eyes. Ellie's question had become a lens, exposing a truth too stark to duck, a scar too deep to gloss, and Miller's admission had struck the flint, sparking a blaze that tore through the dusk. The El Paso lot shook now. A tempest roaring from Ellie's spark, fanned by Miller's unraveling into a fire that consumed every inch of the space. He stood bared, his suit creased, his hands flexing as if clawing for a hold he'd lost. Ellie held her ground, her striped hoodie a flare of quiet smarts against the gloom, her journal a banner of a challenge that had flipped the night into chaos and forged it into something real. The crowd surged, tears streaked weathered faces, cutting trails through dust and time. Hands gripped tight, knuckles paling, eyes blazed with shock, fury, and a dawning resolve that flickered like stars through the haze. Her question, "Why were you building walls if Luis ain't here?" had ripped the lot open, peeling back layers of noise to reveal a pulsing wound, and Miller's "I ain't got it right" had lit the match, igniting a fire that wouldn't dim. Miller swiped his brow, his fingers brushing his hair as he stepped back, but his shield was ash now, a relic of a certainty he couldn't reclaim. "I'm protecting you," he declared in memos and studios, his voice ringing across cables and screens, a line that once drew nods and raised fists. Now it shadowed him, etched into his face-tight lips slashed thin, shadowed eyes glistening with a guilt he couldn't shake, a doubt that clung like desert chill. The crowd felt it too, their murmurs swelling into a gale soft at first, a ripple of "she's right" and "what about us?" Then louder, a chorus of voices clashing in a storm of frustration and awakening. A rancher stood, his Stetson taut, his gruff "my hands too" slicing the din. A worker rose, his sob breaking as he nodded, his "we're breaking" a whisper that carried. A mom slammed her bottle, her muttered "this ain't safe," a plea that hung thick. Ellie's Tia lurched up, pulling her close, her bandana falling as she pressed her lips to Ellie's ponytail, her frail frame quaking with pride and ache. "You're my strong one, Mija," she choked, her voice splintering as tears fell, soaking Ellie's hoodie with dark streaks. Ellie nodded, patting her arm with a gentleness beyond her years, her brown eyes locked on Miller, shining with a quiet steel that wouldn't bend. Miller knelt again, his shoes scuffing, and reached out with a trembling hand. Ellie took idony fingers curling into a shaking palm, a bridge forged in the wreckage of a night neither saw coming. "You're a force, Ellie," Miller said, his voice thick with wonder, breaking under the weight. "Don't ever stop pushing, you hear?" Ellie smiled, soft but fierce, a curve of her lips that lit her face like dawn over the dunes. "Luis wouldn't," she whispered, her words a spur and a balm. And Miller stilled, Maria's shadow echoing in his grit. He rose slow, his shoes scraping as he stood, and turned to the crowd, his voice climbing, raw and unbound, cutting through the chaos like a flare in the dusk. "This ain't just my wake up," he said, fierce and trembling, his hands slashing the air as if to etch the words into the tarps. "It's ours, all of ours. Kids like Ellie see through the stats while we build and boast, while we duck the real cost tearing them apart. She's outsmarted Meso. Why ain't we outsmarting this together? Why are we splitting kids when we can fix it?" The lot exploded, applause thundered like a storm, shouts tore from throats raw with feeling, boots stomped as people surged in a swell that shook the ground. A worker stood, sobbing, clapping till his hands reddened. A rancher pounded his fist, his hell yes a growl that rumbled through. A mom lifted her kid, her yes, a chant that wove into the roar. Strangers linked arms, ranchers with workers, moms with retirees, voices crashing in a clamor of "we've got to do it. This is ours, no more walls." And Ellie stood with her Tia, a fragile ember, now a blazing torch lighting the night. Miller raised both hands, stilling the tempest with a gesture that shook but held, his face a clash of ruin and fire, cheeks streaked with sweat, eyes alight with a purpose that burned through the haze. "Tomorrow, I'm back in the fight," he said, steady but quaking with resolve. "Not just to argue. I'm sitting with kids like Ellie, families like yours, ranchers, workers, all of you, and we're sorting this out together. Safety ain't walls, it's truth we hold, and I'll be damned if I don't start now." The crowd roared. A wave lifting the sky collapsed sharp as thunder. Cheers ragged with hope, tears streaming down, faces raised in defiance and unity. In Ellie's Tia hoisted her up, her striped hoodie soaring as she waved her journal like a flare against the dark. People stood bound by a shared scar, a fragile hope flaring into something fierce, their applause a vow to rise, to face, to mend. As Miller stepped back, his shoulders slumped but his eyes blazing, the lot pulsed with a truth that wouldn't fade. A 9-year-old had undone a mastermind, not with cunning, but with a question too pure to dodge. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, lost in the din, "for showing us up." Ellie nodded, ponytail bouncing, and whispered to her Tia, "Luis be proud, right?" She hugged her tight, tears soaking her hoodie, her voice a broken sob of love. "So proud, Midjay, so proud," he'd cheer. The lights dimmed, but the fire held. People lingered, plotting, changed, a community forged in a little girl's smarts, her voice echoing beyond the river to a nation watching. If a 9-year-old could pierce the noise, so could we.